When the street was still gray with dawn, Mara Benitez unlocked the front door of Heliotrope Bakery and stepped into the faint, lavender hum that only she could hear. To other people, the interior was silent, but to Mara, whose synesthesia glued tastes to colors, textures to notes, and scents to entire chords, the room thrummed like a string quartet warming up. Brass lights glinted against glass cases, mixing a polite gold with the reasoning blue of the tiled floor. She inhaled, and vanilla echoed as a distant bell, while the cinnamon stored in jars behind the counter rumbled like a timpani beneath her ribs. For most of her 32 years, Mara believed that everyone experienced the world this way. She'd assumed each child saw periwinkle dust pour from a loaf of bread as they tore it open, or heard cracked pepper snapping like maracas. Only at 14, watching her classmates bite into cafeteria rolls with unremarkable faces, did she realize her senses were braided in a pattern all her own. Where others saw flour, she saw possibility. Where they tasted sugar, she tasted chronology moments stitched together like beads on a string. Her grandmother, Abuela Sabelia, had been the one to show her how to listen closer. "If you lean in," she whispered one summer, placing a spoonful of guava jam on Mara's tongue, "you can hear the year it was harvested, the song the farmers sang, the ache in their feet. Flavor is memory patiently waiting for a mouth." They spent August afternoons in the kitchen, whispering to bowls and humming to dough. After Sabelia's death, Mara inherited both the tiny downtown bakery and a map of flavors so detailed it felt almost holy. Heliotrope opened officially at 7, but the bell over the door jingled at 6:45. First through the threshold came Clara Ramos, the florist from next door whose curls smelled of pine sap and whose grief shimmered pewter against Mara's eyelids. Clara's mother had died 6 months earlier, and every morning since, she arrived for the same pastry. One almond croissant, buttery crescents flaked with a dusting of nutmeg. Today, while Clara waited, Mara shut her eyes and pressed a fingertip to the pastry's center. Brass-colored warmth billowed around her. The croissant tasted like silken sun, the kind filtered through sheer curtains. Bite by bite, Clara relaxed, shoulders unclenching, eyes brightening. By the final crumb, the pewter grief had lightened to silver, still heavy, but malleable. "Thank you," Clara said, voice softer than petals. She never asked how it worked. Some people preferred mystery to explanation. An hour later, the bakery was fragrant with cardamom knots and sugar-kissed conchas when the next unusual request arrived. A man in a neat charcoal suit, morning band still snug on his left sleeve, approached the counter. He removed his hat, folding it like paper. "Mara Benitez," he said, consulting the embossed business card he carried like a passport. "People tell me you can bake memories." "Memories choose their own recipe," Mara answered. "But I can try." "What is it you miss?" "My wife," he said simply. "I remember the way she laughed at sea. We honeymooned on the Cantabrian coast, and every time a wave broke, she laughed, as if the ocean told a joke only she understood. I want to hear that laugh again." Behind him, the other patrons quieted. Requests like these, fragile as porcelain, always hushed the room. Mara nodded toward a sunlit table. "Wait there. This might take a while." In the kitchen, she scanned her shelves. Salt for the ocean's sting offered a no-brainer, but which salt? The pale coral flakes from Cyprus sang in uneven rhythms, too restless. She needed laughter, not raw surprise. Brittany Fleur de Sel tasted of gull wings and knitted sweaters. Closer, she paired it with dried kombu ground to a powder for the tide's depth, then sifted in lemon zest, whose color hovered bright teal in her inner eye, the color of resolve. For the dough, she used her grandmother's Basque esponjoso batter, lighter than mousse, able to catch air the way a sail catches wind. While the cake baked, the kitchen vibrated with minor key giggles. Like children hiding under blankets, Mara whipped a glaze of white chocolate and burnt sugar until it felt like sea foam on fingertips. Last, she dotted the top with candied myrto berries. Their purple played a high oboe note, the kind that pirouetted upward and vanished. She served the pastry on a ceramic dish the color of low tide. The widower lifted a forkful, cautious. The moment the crumbs melted on his tongue, his spine straightened. Tears surfaced, yet his smile widened as though his face tried to stretch around a lighthouse beam. He closed his eyes, listening to something only he could hear, his wife's laughter skipping across shoreline stones. When the plate emptied, he bowed to Mara, unable to speak, and left, holding the hat against his heart as if it might otherwise burst. By mid-afternoon, word of the memory baker reached farther than usual. A TV crew once suggested filming her process, but the camera's neon chartreuse glare clashed violently with the gentle mauves of nostalgia, so Mara refused. Still, rumors drifted of people reunited with childhood, of apologies accomplished through butter and yeast. Individuals came seeking first kisses, lost fathers, second chances. That evening, just before closing, a woman Mara had never seen arrived, shoulders squared as though braced for wind. She wore a red coat the shade of defiance. "I need to unremember something," she announced. Her tone rang steel gray, sour on Mara's palate. Mara had practiced healing, mending, transporting, but erasure? "You can't scrape color from a canvas without tearing the fabric," she cautioned. The woman's jaw set. "I was cruel to my sister before she died," she confessed. "I said things about her addictions, her failings. I can't sleep without hearing my words scratching the walls. I want your pastry to drown that sound." Mara hesitated. She owned no recipe for oblivion. Memory mattered, even when jagged. Still, the woman's despair rang so loud it made the air taste metallic. "I cannot erase," Mara said finally, "but I can translate. Make the memory teach instead of wound." The woman's eyes flooded. "Please." So Mara baked another cake, infused with rosemary for remembrance, not regret, and lilac honey for forgiveness. She folded in black cocoa, the bitterness necessary for contrast, and topped it with a glassy sugar sheet etched in swirling lines like river currents, because water keeps moving even when stones sink. The pastry tasted of eulogy, of moonlit confession. It would let the woman revisit that awful afternoon, but from above, like watching herself from the ceiling, understanding her anger had been fear, wearing barbs. After the first bite, the woman sobbed. Not the sharp sob of self-laceration, but a quieter, rounding cry. She left, clutching the leftover slices in parchment, and whispered, "I'll share this with my niece." The bakery's reputation bloomed. Some customers wanted only excellent bread, and for them, Mara obliged with crusty boulets, shimmering terracotta, and calm. Others brought more elaborate needs: a clockmaker desperate to taste the ticking of the first watch he built, a retired ballerina longing for the applause that once rose around her like confetti, a teenager hoping to remember her father's face before chemo altered it. Mara listened, mixed, proofed, and plated, yet beneath each success, a thin bruise pulsed. Mara herself carried an unresolved memory, one she never attempted to bake. 5 years earlier, her younger brother, Julio, had driven away after a volcanic argument about their parents' estate. He claimed Mara hid behind pastries instead of confronting reality. She'd shouted that he ran from pain. He sped off, a deer leapt across the road, and Julio swerved into a ravine. Brain injury, coma, hospital corridors, washed in antiseptic white noise. Though he opened his eyes weeks later, he awoke unable to speak or recognize flavors. He lived now in an assisted facility across the city, his days flat as unseasoned dough. Mara visited every Sunday, but he never responded. No flicker, no warmth. Her synesthesia could detect only a chalky beige vibration from his room, like chalk scraped on stone. She had tried bringing ordinary cakes, but he swallowed without reaction. She feared tasting memories on his behalf would violate his autonomy, so she avoided the experiment and poured her energy into healing strangers instead. But one snowy Thursday, a delivery driver handed Mara a letter sealed with hospital stationery. Inside was a shaky, penciled scrawl. Julio's name repeated 3 times. Letters wandering like lost sheep. Below it, a single word, lights. The therapist wrote a note explaining that Julio had spent the previous night pointing at the ceiling, murmuring that word until exhaustion claimed him. Perhaps, the therapist suggested, he remembered Christmas lights. Perhaps something else. That evening, Mara leaned against her bakery's darkened doorway, city snow swirling in violet silence. If her pastries could resurrect ocean laughter and rewrite regret, maybe they could reach Julio, too. She decided to try. She closed the shop for 3 days. The sign on the door read, "Inventing," and curious noses pressed against fogged glass. But she remained inside, apron stiff with flour dust. First, she revisited childhood, the 2 of them stringing paper lanterns across Abuela's courtyard each December. Their parents argued about money, but the lanterns glowed soft orange, and Julio cupped them like fireflies, so orange zest for warmth. Then the memory of chasing each other with sparklers on summer nights, their squeals shaking the plum trees, so she added plum pert, its color a playful magenta note. She thought of the fight, of bitterness, of the wreckage. Could a pastry hold both joy and sorrow without collapsing? She whisked in dark molasses that sounded like deep cello grief's resonance. For structure, she used a sourdough starter harvested the night of a meteor shower 20 years ago. Its culture had matured alongside them. She folded in shards of crystallized ginger for surprise. The deer on the road, a drizzle of agar-agar gel infused with matcha, whose earthy sting matched asphalt after rain. The batter swirled iridescent greens, haloed by oranges, and smelled like flickering hope. She baked it in a ring mold shaped like a halo of lights. Once cooled, she brushed the surface with edible silver dust resembling distant stars and pressed tiny LED bulbs into the center cavity, set to glow when the cake was sliced. She named it Losis. Saturday morning, she packed the cake and took a taxi to the facility. The quarters tasted hospital white, sterile, and numb. Julio sat in a wheelchair by a window, eyes blank as unchecked boxes. Mara greeted him, placed the cake box on a tray, and carefully cut a slice. The LEDs blinked softly, casting prismatic glimmers on the frosting. She lifted a forkful to his lips. At first, no sign, then his pupils adjusted, focusing on the light within the cake. He chewed. Mara felt color swirl from him, first a dusty peach, then a cascade of tangerine spirals. Tears slid down his cheeks. He reached clumsy and touched her wrist. Hermana, he whispered, voice gravelly, as if unsealing years of silence. Mara stifled a sob. Nurses paused nearby, witnessing the impossible, a man pronounced incapable of complex speech, forming syllables. Lucis, he repeated, louder this time, then managed, pretty. He smiled, lopsided but unmistakable. Over the following weeks, Julio's therapist integrated Lucis slices into speech exercises. Each bite coaxed forth another fragment: paper lanterns, plums, love you. Doctors documented a recovery they called miraculous, though unscientific, but Mara knew that not all medicine resided in textbooks. Some lived in the color of caramel or the timbre of nutmeg. News of Julio's progress eclipsed the bakery rumors. Journalists camped outside. Mara reluctantly agreed to a single interview, on condition that no cameras entered her kitchen. She spoke about connection, about how flavor writes stories on the tongue, how memory is less a library than a garden. Aromas the wind stirs when someone walks through. That winter, Heliotrope Bakery introduced a new menu section labeled Reconciliations. A son might request the roasted chestnut brioche that smelled like the campfire where he once told his dad he hated him. Now they'd share it and say love instead. A widow bought orange peppermint meringues for Christmas morning because her wife always said snow tasted exactly like that. Patrons left lighter, as if returning coats they no longer needed. One blustery March afternoon, Clara, the florist, placed a bouquet of Heliotrope's bright purple apologies in a vase on the counter. They mean devotion, she reminded Mara. Seems fitting. Mara realized she couldn't recall the last time Clara left pewter grief behind. Now the florist hummed to herself, arranging blossoms whose fragrance sounded like piccolos. Closing hour neared when the widower from months earlier returned. He carried a small seashell and offered it to Mara. I listened inside, he said, and heard waves. But I can't remember my wife's face that morning on the beach, only her laugh. Could you help? Mara studied the shell, heard turquoise chords shifting beneath mother of a pearl. Yes, she said, but this time you will bake with me. They moved into the kitchen. She handed him lemons to zest, and the fragrance formed delicate brushstrokes of gold. She taught him to fold egg whites until they composed soft clouds. While they worked, he told stories. Her freckles, the sand in her eyelashes, the way she said the word serendipity. Each detail became an ingredient: pink peppercorns for freckles, fine coconut flakes for sand, a hint of champagne vinegar for the bubbles in her laughter. Together, they created more than a memory. They created presence. When the cake cooled, he tasted it and gasped, as though the room had filled with morning sun. He wept, but softly, and thanked Mara for letting him participate in the alchemy. That night, alone after cleanup, Mara locked the front door, yet stayed within the bakery's hush. The tiled floor hummed a contented cerulean. For the first time since Abuela died, Mara baked solely for herself. a single citrus honey muffin filled with echoes of quiet satisfaction, the color emerald settling over coal hearths, the sound of a pew closing after prayer. She bit into it, and her own memories rose like birds. Abuela's wrinkled hands guiding hers, Julio laughing at dough stuck to his nose, her parents dancing briefly during a lull in their arguments. He tasted not just individual memories, but the braided cord that connected them all. The simple, sturdy truth that sweetness survives. Outside, a late winter moon poured silver onto the sidewalk, and Mara heard its flavor, cool mint layered with chalky charcoal, a promise of spring. She smiled, switched off the lights, and let the bakery fall into its nocturne. Tomorrow, someone new would walk through the door, carrying a pocket of longing, and she would listen, measure, whisk, and knead. And somewhere between the crack of an egg and the sigh of a cooling rack, she would prove again what Abuela taught her, that flavor is memory patiently waiting for a mouth, and that every regret, if gently folded into batter, can rise into forgiveness.